Aleluya, aleluya, aleluya.
No permita Dios que yo me gloríe en algo que no sea la cruz de nuestro Señor Jesucristo, por el cual el mundo está crucificado para mí y yo para el mundo.
Aleluya, aleluya, aleluya.
El Señor esté con ustedes. Del Santo Evangelio según San Mateo. En aquel tiempo, Jesús a sus discípulos se dirigieron a los poblados de Cesarea de Filipo. Por el camino les hizo esta pregunta: ¿quién dice la gente que soy yo? Ellos le contestaron: algunos dicen que eres Juan el Bautista, otros que Elías, y otros que alguno de los profetas. Entonces él les preguntó: ¿y ustedes quién dicen que soy yo? Pedro le respondió: tú eres el Mesías. Y él les ordenó que no se lo dijeran a nadie. Luego se puso a explicarles que era necesario que el Hijo del Hombre padeciera mucho, que fuera rechazado por los ancianos, los sumos sacerdotes y los escribas, que fuera entregado a la muerte y resucitará al tercer día. Todo esto lo dijo con entera claridad. Entonces Pedro se lo llevó aparte, trataba de disuadirlo. Jesús se volvió y mirando a sus discípulos, reprendió a Pedro con estas palabras: apártate de mí, Satanás, porque tú no juzgas según Dios, sino según los hombres. Después llamó a la multitud y a sus discípulos. Él les dijo: el que quiera venir conmigo, que renuncie a sí mismo, que cargue con su cruz y que me siga. Pues el que quiera salvar su vida, la perderá, pero el que pierda su vida por mí y por el Evangelio, la salvará. Jesus and his disciples set out for the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Along the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" They said in reply, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter said to him in reply, "You are the Christ." Then he warned them not to tell anyone about him. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer greatly and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and rise after 3 days. He spoke this openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. At this he turned around and, looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do." He summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and that of the gospel will save it." Palabra del Señor. Good afternoon, everyone. When Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am? And who do you say that I am?" This is a kind of a Christology. It's part of the dogmatic theology if you study priesthood in the seminary. Peter's reply was, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." What will be your reply when Jesus will ask you? Well, for those who are hungry, Jesus will be the bread of life. For those who are sick, your reply is, "You are the wounded healer." For those who are poor, they will say, "You are the provider, the divine providence." And who Jesus say? Who do you say about Jesus? But when Peter said that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, did he really understand what he was talking about? Well, let's move forward. Israelites during the time of Jesus were expecting a Messiah that will liberate them from foreign powers. This is a kind of a political Messiah, a hero against the Romans. And that's what they are expecting until now. That is why Peter rebuked Jesus in talking about his death. It might scandalize those who expected him to be a political Messiah. Like a king talking about his death, talking about his humiliation. It's impossible. No? That's why Peter, thinking about human thought, that a Messiah will not die, a Messiah will lead the people towards liberation, but it's different. The reply of Jesus was most likely not the reply that Peter was expecting from Jesus. Peter himself was struggling with fear as Jesus explained that he would be entering into much suffering and death at the hands of the religious leaders of that time, political leaders of the time. Peter loved Jesus and was fearful and anxious about the thought of his master suffering and being killed. So Peter, motivated by fear and confusion, tried to talk some sense into Jesus. You don't have to say that. You don't have to tell that, because Jesus in our gospel spoke openly about it, and Peter silenced him. You don't have to say that. You are sowing fear to people because they are expecting you to be the king, to be the leader, to be the liberator. Just like when the bishop will say, and the priest will say that this time there are also a lot of people who are infected with Delta. And some will say, don't say that. You are telling people, you are sowing fear to people. Just like Peter, no? Don't say that. But by saying it, making the people aware that they need to do something to save themselves from this virus, right? The result, Peter was rebuked in the presence of the other apostles by Jesus, and went so far as to say, "Get behind me, Satan." That must have hurt. When you say, "Don't say that, Father, because you are sowing fear to people." What if I will say, "Get behind me, Satan"? You will be hurt, no? To understand this properly, we must start with the obvious conclusion that Jesus' words were words of great love, concern. Jesus is not capable of anything other than love. Therefore, we must seek to understand how these strong words from Jesus were loving and holy. The key to understand this is the second thing Jesus said. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do. Jesus had just revealed to the apostles the deepest mystery of his life's mission. Namely, he just revealed that his mission was to accept unjust persecution and death at the hands of the religious leaders and political leaders. But in revealing this, it is also clear that he intended to bring good out of his suffering. He would not have allowed this suffering if it were not for some greater good. The hard part is that in order to understand this great mystery of suffering, one needs a deep faith. The apostles were being challenged to see this situation from the divine perspective. Peter was having a hard time doing so. That is why Jesus had to challenge him so directly. Jesus' rebuke was a rebuke of love, helping Peter break free of his fear and limited vision so as to enter into this profound mystery of Jesus' loving sacrifice. Now reflect today upon your own struggle with the cross of Christ. His sufferings continue to be made present in our world through the love and sacrifices of his sons and daughters. When Christians suffer on account of their faith, we must see this from the eyes of God, not the eyes of men. We must see the divine blessings that accompany such sufferings, and we must accept them in accord with the great mystery of God's plan. Now, Español. Cuando Jesús preguntó a sus discípulos, ¿quién dice la gente que soy yo? ¿Y quién dice que soy yo? La respuesta de Pedro fue, tú eres el Cristo, el Hijo de Dios viviente. Pero, ¿entendió realmente Pedro de qué estaba hablando? Los israelitas durante ese tiempo esperaban una Mesías que los liberaría del poder extranjero, como el de los romanos. Por eso Pedro reprendió a Jesús al hablar de su muerte, porque podría escandalizar a quienes esperaban que él fuera la Mesías política. La respuesta de Jesús probablemente no fue la respuesta que Pedro esperaba de Jesús. Pedro estaba luchando contra el miedo cuando Jesús le explicó que estaría entrando en mucho sufrimiento y muerte a manos de los líderes religiosos de la época. Pedro amaba a Jesús y estaba temeroso y ansioso por la idea de que su maestro sufriera y lo mataran. Así que Pedro, motivado por el miedo y la confusión, trató de hacer entrar en razón a Jesús. El resultado, Pedro fue reprendido por Jesús en presencia de los otros apóstoles. Jesús fue tan lejos como para decir: apártate de mí, Satanás. Eso debe haber dolido. Para entender esto correctamente, debemos comenzar con la conclusión obvia de que las palabras de Jesús fueron palabras de gran amor. Jesús no es capaz de nada más que amar. Por lo tanto, debemos procurar comprender cómo estas palabras fuertes de Jesús fueron amorosas y santas. La clave para entender esto es lo segundo que dijo Jesús: no piensas como Dios, sino como piensan los seres humanos. Jesús acababa de revelar a los apóstoles el misterio más profundo de la misión de su vida. Es decir, acaba de revelar que su misión era aceptar la persecución injusta y la muerte, en la muerte a manos de los líderes religiosos. Pero al revelar esto, también está claro que tenía la intención de sacar algo bueno de este sufrimiento. No habría permitido este sufrimiento si no fuera por el bien mayor. Lo difícil es que para comprender este gran misterio del sufrimiento se necesita una fe profunda. Los apóstoles estaban siendo desafiados a ver esta situación desde la perspectiva divina. Pedro estaba teniendo dificultades para hacerlo, y por eso Jesús tuvo que desafiarlo tan directamente. La reprimenda de Jesús fue una reprimenda de amor que ayudó a Pedro a liberarse de su miedo y visión limitada para entrar en este profundo misterio del sacrificio amoroso de Jesús. Reflexionen hoy sobre su propia lucha con la cruz de Cristo. Sus sufrimientos continúan haciéndose presentes en nuestro mundo a través del amor y los sacrificios de sus hijos y hijas. Cuando los cristianos sufren a causa de su fe, debemos verlo con los ojos de Dios, no con los ojos de los hombres. Debemos ver las bendiciones divinas que acompañan a tales sufrimientos y debemos aceptarlos de acuerdo con el gran misterio del plan de Dios. Amén.